No, Henry left. All right, welcome everyone. Let's see, let's check if we're live. I think we're live. I hope we're live. Yes, we are live. Yeah, all right. We are live. Let us get started very soon. We got Henry here. I don't see Robert yet. You gotta love it because I'm kind of stuck in a point where I can't open my DMs because we're streaming this. But we'll manage. But welcome everyone. We're going to talk about Anchor. I'm assuming, Henry, do you have everything set up to where you can talk to? I'm going to make sure I have the right permissions and stuff.
I can talk. I don't know if you can hear me okay.
Yeah, I just want to make sure because we're doing the, it's kind of a jerry-rigged stream, to be perfectly honest. And for those that are watching the stream probably have no idea what's going on, but we can manage it. Just make sure I pull up this so that I can grab my notes and we can get started. All right, there we go. I'm going to check see if Robert's able to come in. Let's see, has he sent me a message? But yeah, welcome everyone to the Anchor community call. We'll see if we can do this as, I don't know, we'll discuss it. We'll figure out if we can do this like a monthly type of thing, or if there's some other cadence that we should get this done. Hello, Robert. Welcome. I believe we are streaming, and I'm hoping we're audible. Nobody is complaining about it, so I'm assuming we're audible. But it's a very jerry-rigged setup, to be perfectly honest, what I have right now to stream this, because I found
It's
out.
good on YouTube. I just checked YouTube.
Okay, you found it? Cool, awesome. Do you know if you can hear it?
Yeah, the audio is coming through nice and clear.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Yeah, it's very jerry-rigged because Discord does not have streaming support. So yeah, it's a very custom solution what I did. Anyways, all right. So welcome everyone. Looks like we have a decent amount of people here today, and even more people viewing it. So we're going to go through what we are going to discuss, like what we think of the future of Anchor, as well as like where we are today, and what our plans are, and kind of get into a discussion of what kind of features should we include into the future of Anchor, V1, V2, whatever. What kind of things should we leave out? There's a couple features that we want to discuss of like, should we actually do this, or should we just say it's okay, we move on with life? Let's just keep going, because they're, especially like if one of them is like the duplicate accounts, should we do that type of thing? We'll get there. And then should we have a larger process of like making proposals? But we'll get there. But first off, I wanted to kind of like introduce where we are, what has happened to Anchor up to this point, and where we're going. So first off, if you're probably aware at this point that you saw that Anchor, the repo, moved from Coral XYZ to Solana Foundations org. So that is just a transfer of ownership. We thank Armani for all the work that he's done in the past and all the other people that have helped out, including, I know Henry, you're on this call. We're just going to use this, the resources that we have at Foundation, to hopefully push it forward into the modern development of Solana. So we're going to really try to move it forward very quickly. And that's what we're doing here, right? So in the role of like what you might be asking, like, what are we doing on the Foundation side to actually make this happen, make Anchor move forward? So Foundation is doing a couple things. So I'm the main point of contact at Foundation that's pushing forward Anchor. What we're doing is we're hoping to coordinate and help push forward Anchor in a way like more of a project management way. We will do contributions. We will likely have someone full-time at some point in the near future working on Anchor alongside of everybody else in the ecosystem. But we're hoping to help guide and push it forward. Now, I don't just as a the make sure that everybody's aware, I don't see Solana Foundation as the final owner of Anchor. This is a intermittent solution to help move it as fast as possible. What does that mean for the future of Anchor? I'm hoping at some point Anchor adopts something more like Apache Foundation-esque type of solution, but that's like 2 to 5 years. We'll think about it then. Like right now, Solana Foundation is owning it, pushing it forward, and coordinating with the ecosystem and different partners like our good friend Robert. We got Henry Arson and more to hopefully push it forward into the modern age of Solana development. Looks like a decent amount of people have actually able to find the Discord. I'm glad that's not disappeared. So I want to talk about what the plans are, the short-term plans are for Anchor right now. So right now we are on 0.31, and we're trying to get into what is V1 and eventually V2. So let's talk about what's immediate. Well, likely we're going to make a 0.32 version of Anchor and probably start shipping a lot quicker paced of we might have patch versions for smaller changes. Now it'll still take longer for things that are changes to the macros or to the accounts, etc. But we will start shipping a lot quicker so that you can get updates a lot faster to Anchor. There's another thing is that before we get to 1.0, and thank you, Henry, for basically all your work over the weekend, clear out the backlog of issues and PRs so that we can actually manage the repo and move very quickly on it. So we've gone from 430 odd issues to I think it was 120 last time I checked, thanks to a lot of people that are on the call, especially Henry, killing a bunch of those old issues that no longer apply. But there are still issues that exist, and we need to figure out whether or not, hey, is this a feature we want? Are there enough people that want this issue and how to change it? And where do we include it? So short-term wise, we're going to have 0.32. That's still going to be the Anchor that you know and love. It's going to have some additional features to it. These are going to be things like there's a few tooling improvements, which I've actually found out you can already get if you install AVM today, that you can get these tooling improvements. You don't need a version for that. But you'll get some tooling improvements. You'll get some additional just helpers, some additional fixes on the JS library, but it's not that big of a change yet. 1.0, when we get into 1.0, which I'm hoping by end of August, it probably will bleed into September if I'm being perfectly honest with myself and knowing I don't want to kill audit timelines as well. So looking at V1 there, we're trying to get a bunch of changes into V1, namely removing a bunch of the foot guns that exist today, removing a bunch of the dead code that just doesn't need to happen anymore. There's a lot of it. There's a lot of dead code from previous ages of Anchor so that we can make it more maintainable. There is going to be some features that we have and that we are going to be recommending that we'll talk about today as well. Like for example, we're going to upgrade, everybody's not going to like this, but we're going to upgrade Borscht to 1.54, I believe is the latest, because we are at 0.10 and Solana 3.0 will no longer have Borscht 0.10 support. So you'll run into all sorts of issues if we don't upgrade that. We're going to upgrade that. And there's also a big change that I need to make sure everybody's aware on, is that we can't stay on the Coral XYZ package forever. So for V1, we will upgrade to our own package for Anchor, and it will live just for Anchor itself. This will be, ideally I'll have a migration path for everybody to use to where you can just run something and we'll update all your import statements to use the new package, and you don't have to worry about a very painful upgrade. But to be determined, we will test it first before I make any promises. What we want to also do is we want to make sure we encourage a lot more community involvement. So I know there's a lot of people that have made PRs to Anchor in the past that we need to move a lot faster on. A lot of PRs have just become stale, and never been actioned on. So that's part of us making the repo more maintainable. Once we get through all the current PRs and issues, we'll start shipping a lot more of these PRs as soon as possible and get a lot more attention to them, to where we can give you feedback and have you understand of where you're going, what kind of things that we want to update, etc. And that way you don't have stale PRs just lasting forever, because that is not the way that any contributor should work. Another thing is that we'll be reviving this Discord and for contribution and questions a bit more. So thank you all for all joining today on the Discord for this call, so that we can get people communicating what they want for Anchor, moving faster on Anchor, and making sure that we improve it as fast as possible. There's a lot of things going on, right? There's a lot of wants for Anchor, but I need them in one place so that we can start moving in a direction for Anchor. Okay, so there's that. All right, so this is where we kind of get into the first discussion points that will happen amongst us. So one, for V2 of Anchor. So everybody's kind of heard me talk about V1 for 0.32 at this point. V2 of Anchor, you may have seen me talk about on Twitter here and there. V2, what's for Anchor? But I need them in one place so that we there we go. So V2, what we want to see for Anchor, and what we're going to do, the first point of discussion we have is we want to make it highly optimized, easy to eject, and easily to move forward with, but at the same time still having the developer experience that you know and love of Anchor. Now, knowing as a framework, you won't be able to get as low as possible in the CU, but we still need it for security reasons, etc., for new people coming in. One of those things is we want to make sure that we have Pinocchio, right, as an entry point instead of what is today of Solana program. But there is discussion that we have right now is that what does that migration path look like between Anchor V1, 0.31, whatever, to V2? The original thought for Anchor V2 was to rewrite it from the ground up, completely change it to where while it still has very similar DX, it uses the IDL, we can make it as optimized as possible, as fast as possible, if we actually rewrite it from the ground up. That comes with a cost, right? Migration cost is very difficult on that part. If you want to upgrade from your V1 to V2, you might have some difficulty. It'll take more work. Like it will be very similar to what you see. Well, okay, maybe not similar, but what you currently see today between going from Web3.js 1.0 to Kit, Gil, whatever, where you basically have to rewrite your program. Now, I don't want to cause that developer friction, but it's in the same case, like we can get the most amount of improvements if we do that kind of thing. On the flip side, we can do it a little more incrementally, where V2 is maybe Pinocchio with a bunch of other improvements, where the migration is not as hard. There still might be a little bit of work, but it won't be as jarring as a full rewrite. So I first wanted to open up the floor for that, is that this is where we're at right now and what our thought process is for V2. What are people's preferences and where do people want to go for it? Do you want a full rewrite? Do you want something a little bit like rip off the Band-Aid and full rewrite, see you optimize the hell out of it and just deal with the developer experience problems? Or do you want to go a little bit more incrementally as a V2 is Pinocchio with some other things, and while we would get CU improvements, it wouldn't be the best and it would take a little bit longer to get to that modern Solana development.
I guess I can speak to, I'm not a developer, right? So my experience is a little biased, but I'm thinking with this Anchor V2 upgrade, one of the questions we'd probably get from our clients is, should we upgrade? Or, what does the upgrade path look like? And, the story I'd like to be able to tell them is, you don't have to think about it that much, right? You just drop it in, you change the 1 to a 2. There might be some stuff that gets deprecated, right, that you might need to switch out, but there's a very clear migration path. And I think if we want to get a lot of V2 adoption, that to me seems really important, especially if it's smart contract code. One thing is all this stuff needs to be re-audited if people want to migrate, right? So if it's a huge diff that means a lot of rewriting. I don't think most people would do that. It would take a lot of money and time and effort. So my preference would be for it to be fully compatible or as compatible as possible. But I think the question is, can we keep the, like, how optimized can it be if we keep the interface? Like, is it possible to keep it really optimized or make it really optimized and efficient if we're stuck with sort of a legacy Anchor interface, or is that legacy interface a blocker for making it performant, which I'm not sure about.
Well, I think that you should really think of Anchor as a syntax rather than as like a library, right? Like, because the way it does things is not really very Rusty. Like, if you think about like how it does like almost everything, it has very little to do with Rust, right? Like, it's basically you're only using Rust in your function buddies, really, right? Like, so I think if you think of Anchor from the perspective of like there's two things, right? When you're coming down to like what can we optimize and what can't we optimize. So I think the thing that needs to be decided is, do we care about supporting programs that were created with previous versions? As in, let's say that I took the same syntax from something that was made with Anchor 30, like 0.30, and I put it into Anchor 2, right? I could make a program that would run and work and the tests would work and whatever, right? But may not necessarily maintain the data structures that are already on chain deployed in a previous version, if you get what I mean. Like, and the reason for that is like the different, basically like subtle differences between like the optimal versions of like zero copy versus Borscht, like just stuff like that you would need to think about. So it's like, if the idea is that there is total backwards compatibility, then I think you would be limited in sort of the extreme optimization that would be possible. But in terms of like what makes it really bad right now, it's mostly copying by default, Solana invoke, and entry point. And just migrating to Pinocchio would solve most of those things. Like, think about how many CPIs you do in Anchor, right? Like, I mean, that would nuke like just about all of the really high CU things.
Is there I guess aside from this sort of Borscht to zero copy migration, is there anything else that you think is particularly bad? I guess I'm thinking for Borscht and zero copy, it's sort of like Anchor v1 has zero copy, right? So if
but it's opt-in, right?
Yeah, exactly. But
like, so like, let me just like explain the biggest problem that you're going to come up against with Anchor, right? And that is that it encourages people to write types with dynamically sized data with absolutely no concept of prioritizing fixed length data first in a struct, to have like offsets to access that data efficiently or update it efficiently. And so like you have someone who put like a string and then a pub key and then a vec, right? And the way to like efficiently deserialize, edit, and reserialize data like that, when it's out of order, basically like what Anchor does is copy everything to the stack, modify it, and then take the copied result and copy it back. And that's because it's containing dynamic types, and we need to do like heap allocations or like a large stack allocation with some maximum, allocated data that we can modify. And basically like it's an absolute mess if you're trying to deal with dynamic data. And that, because Anchor just copies everything, it doesn't care. But if you were to like, if you were to start with like zero copy, it would force you into like alignment. I don't believe, does zero copy allow you to do dynamically sized data in Anchor? I don't believe it would, because like that would be really, really hard to deal with. No, right?
It doesn't. Usually what you end up doing is like you create a zero copy struct, and then after that struct is over, put your dynamic data, kind of like Merkle trees do in compression.
Yeah, so like that's kind of like nice, right? But the problem, that's what I'm trying to say, is like you just are not going to take something that's made with Borscht that puts dynamic data randomly in a struct and then have that work nicely with zero copy. That's just not going to happen.
Right, but I guess maybe my point is Anchor V1 already supports zero copy, right? So it seems like developers are opting in to use, and maybe this is a developer education story, but it feels like developers are already opting in to use Borscht over zero copy, right? So that's sort of a choice and a trade-off they made, right? So for example, maybe there's some reason they want to use Borscht instead of zero copy.
It might
Yeah, I
be.
mean, I use Borscht for pretty much everything. The
I would
dev
say
app
that, yeah,
on zero
most
copy.
devs don't. Most devs
Like-
don't use zero copy. It's like, oh shit, my stack blew up. Okay, I'll think about it. That's literally like that's the behavior of most Anchor devs.
Right, but I'm saying that is, I think that's fine, right? Because that is a choice they made, and I mean, if they wanted to optimize the CUs a lot, they could always use zero. I mean, they can use zero copy in Anchor
No,
V1,
but the problem is they can't, because like, let's say I'm Drift and I've already like deployed a program and it already has some on-chain structure, and I already decided to like, put a string somewhere just randomly in my struct. Well, then like, I'm not going to be able to just like move over to zero copy and just like magically that problem is just going to go away. Do you know what I mean? Like, the problem is not for new programs. The problem is for existing programs that are already deployed.
Right. I understand that. I mean, maybe part of the solution is we can try to. So one example is this dynamic array type, right? Like that seems like a pretty common use case for zero copy structs. I know Meteora, or I think some of our clients did some weird custom stuff. So maybe we can try to add first class support for some sort of like dynamically sized zero copy type that's safe by default. Maybe that's part of the issue, and try to get better support for zero copy. But I mean, otherwise it feels like, yeah, I agree. There's people who deployed Borscht programs or programs with Borscht state who can't migrate to zero copy. But I think that is the same for Anchor V1, right? Like,
Yes, but what I'm
like
trying
Drift
to say
could have
is
used
that,
zero copy, but they didn't.
yes, they should have, and they like basically they wrote bad programs because Anchor encouraged them to not care about this problem, right?
Okay.
And so if we're breaking, like, if we're going for like zero copy by default, or to like even like basically try to avoid like stack allocations at all for like doing any kind of like modifications to any data, then people who made programs where their data was dynamically allocated randomly in a struct are going to suffer, because the only way for you to kind of modify a struct efficiently, like after some dynamic data, is to just like probably like copy the whole thing, unless it's like the last thing in the struct. Then it's like it's basically like the branch of logic of like how you would solve this has quite a few variables to decide like what would be the like the best way to do it. And just if you put dynamic data midway through your struct because Anchor encourages you to not care about this, then that's going to be a really big problem for people who already deployed programs. So that's why I was sort of saying, like, do we care about backwards compatibility with already deployed programs or not?
I think that comes down to like, what is the goal here? Like, are we running into CU issues where Solana is at capacity and core devs are mad because most of the programs that are doing a lot of volume are Anchor and they're really slow, right? If that's actually a pressing problem, then I think you come out with an Anchor V1 that has Pinocchio, and then you start working on ripping the Band-Aid off. I don't think there's much you can do other than switch Anchor to Pinocchio to make the current syntax like super.
You just need to like make the entry point not terrible, and you need to make Solana invoke not terrible. And KV already did both of these, and I already merged one of them. I already PR'd one of them, and he already PR'd the other, and it was never merged. And that would just immediately make it like way faster.
Yeah, I think that's the low-hanging fruit. Like, I think you do that, and then you rip the Band-Aid off and make something completely different. And like, speaking as someone who manages a protocol with like dozens of smart contracts, probably not going to rewrite most of those smart contracts in the new Anchor V2. But if I have to write a new smart contract, I would go use Anchor V2. But if you came out with an Anchor v1 that was just rename a few libraries and it got me Pinocchio and fixed the entry point, yeah, I'd definitely upgrade, and then you'd probably see a bunch of CU savings across the network.
Yeah.
Could you bump up those PRs, Emma? Yeah, I think I'll make sure to merge all your PRs moving forward.
I'm
So
familiar.
there won't
Well,
be backlog.
I'm familiar with the PRs. The ask was originally from the previous maintainers that we get this into Solana program itself instead, which just never happened. So we just need to work on getting that into Anchor instead. Also these problems would probably just be solved with Pinocchio, right? Because you do change the entry point, you do change the way that you invoke, etc. Like it's just
yes.
different.
Yes, Pinocchio would solve this, but to rewrite in Pinocchio is a much heavier lift than just merging those two PRs.
Yeah. Okay. So we could do that as like an intermittent solution for V1 versus a V2.
I think that'd be really good.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, we can. I'll look at your PR after this call, Dean.
Yeah, I think the reality is most Anchor programs aren't really that CU or performance constrained. So the best you're
It's not
going to
so
do.
much they are. It's not so much for the program itself, it's for the network, right? Like if we're going to unlock like all of these CUs, but like they're still being all burnt up by Anchor, like that sucks. And like quite frankly, like DeFi is heating up so hard that like you just couldn't really like be very competitive. Like the only competitive program that's written in Anchor right now is probably like Drift, in like DeFi, like in terms of like perps or whatever. Like everyone's moving towards like really efficient stuff because the lower your CUs are, the better you are, your cancels are going to land, and the closer you get to like the Hyperliquid dream or whatever.
Yeah, and also the goal of and what kind of considered for like a V2 full rewrite was that I want to make it to where like, hey, Anchor is still, you can get started really quickly, right? You can build really quickly, you can build your project really quickly, and without having to worry about a bunch of things that you have to if you wrote like native or just Pinocchio. But also an easier way is I don't want it to be a problem to eject it as well if you wanted to. Like for example, like Jupiter, they spent 3 engineers 8 months. That's not something that every protocol can do to hyper optimize their protocol. I need to make that easier. So it's like that. And then also like, as Dean said, for the betterment of the network, right? If I can, to be perfectly honest, if I can just change, if I can make it to where the entry point, invoke, etc., is just easier, it saves a lot of CUs for everybody, and that's just a win for the network. It's like there's enough program. Yes, overall, the Anchor programs are not resource constrained by themselves, but with 88+% of programs being used on Solana today using Anchor programs, if I can optimize CU dramatically enough to where it affects the network and brings up more resources for everybody else, that's a huge win for both now and for the future.
One other concern I had, or that we're seeing, is I think there's a lot of devs who are moving away from Anchor because, I mean, as Dean said, they want better CU performance. But the issue is these new frameworks they're not as familiar with these new frameworks, and they end up writing a lot of bugs. So one thing that we want to see from a security perspective is less framework proliferation. Like we would actually prefer if everyone used Anchor because we're the most familiar with it. Other auditors are the most familiar with it, and also devs are more familiar. Right? I think there's a serious concern for if you move away from Anchor to one of these newfangled frameworks, and you don't really understand what's going on, right? I mean, Anchor abstracts a lot of that stuff away from you, and you don't really need to think about it. If you write something directly with Solana program or with Pinocchio, and you write a bunch of bugs, that's bad for everyone, and it's more work for us, right? Like we have to spend a lot more time trying to either understand your new custom framework, or just reading through a bunch of native Solana Rust code. I guess this might be a question for people is, if Anchor, like, could we get Anchor v2 in a state where you would be happy writing performant programs in it? Right? Like, is that even possible? I guess maybe this is more just a question for Dean.
Well, like right now, the state of the art, right, is nobody likes Kit and nobody likes Gil and nobody likes any of those like new TypeScript libraries, and everyone's already written front ends and everything in Solana Web3.js, and the only really working generator for that is Anchor. So the actual state of the art is to write your program in Pinocchio and then use the new like Anchor discriminator macro to like set like custom discriminators in your instructions so that it's like, you know, as efficient as possible. And then you kind of use Anchor to generate a TypeScript and Rust client to interface with your Pinocchio program. And that's kind of like the state of the art right now, where you have good DevX for the front end and everything, but you have like a program that is actually like functional and performant, right? And so you write it kind of like 1.5 times, right? You write your program, but then you write the interface to your program again in Anchor to generate all of that. Because that side of things is like amazing.
Right. Yeah, I guess the question is, do you see a state where people would be willing to write their programs just in Anchor instead of in Pinocchio or in Pinocchio directly?
Well, if Anchor became macros that were at most one layer, right? Right now we've got, I think, 3-layer macros. So it's incredibly opaque. But if it was just like, at most, right, a proc macro that added derived macros, like if that was as deep as it went with macros, then it should really be possible for us to just like kind of take what it's making and just totally demystify it, right? Because it would just be like, oh, I just implement some trait and you can just like eject from Anchor and go and like write your own code, right? And if you look at like how we're writing Pinocchio programs, like the big difference is like Anchor adds so many checks that you just like don't ever need to do. Like, for example, you do like you make a PDA that goes in your accounts, and you use the PDA for signing a CPI at some point. Anchor will still do every single check. It will like calculate the PDA from the seeds and the bump using try find program address, and then it will like go and like make you rewrite the seeds and then like do a CPI. But if you just do a CPI with those seeds, like you don't need to do the first check. So there's like a lot of stuff like this where it like does 2 or 3 times as many checks as it needs to, right? And so that comes down to like kind of a limitation of syntax, where you're just doing some very basic macros that are designed to just do every check and not let you like take anything out. And that's where Pinocchio will just like will just win, right? But what if you were to like start an Anchor and then you were to like unwrap your program in the sense of like you know you can like eject back to Pinocchio and take out these checks or whatever? Well, then you know at that point maybe it's like it's good enough, right? Like you know, like I think that's what you come up against, right? People always want something that's like faster.
Yeah, that was the original goal for V2 as well, and I mean that's why we're having a discussion on it, is that we can do that to where Anchor is a full rewrite. The expectation is that people don't migrate from V1 to V2, but all new programs are written in V2. And to where it's easy to eject, right? To where there's not too many layers, and then you can easily eject to Pinocchio if you want. So if you want to get that hyper optimization, you can, or you can just stick with the moving fast and and having all these additional checks that are generic on that you know from Anchor today. Well, less than today, but still some that you would have in Anchor V2.
Is there a world where Anchor V2 exists more as a library than a framework, wherein like I can use it for a lot of kind of non-performance centric contract endpoints, but then if I have an endpoint that gets hit very often, you know, like it's a DeFi protocol and it's an endpoint that's on the critical path, then I can implement my own thing. Like I could see a world where you have, you know, the general thing, right, is you have an endpoint, it has some discriminator, and then it gets hit with an array of accounts and some bytes, right? And if you just have a helper function that can parse that array of accounts and bytes and do all of the automatic foot gun prevention that Anchor does when you want it, and then just not do it when you don't want it and have Pinocchio and everything else. That I feel like that would be the best of both worlds. And there's no like explicit eject.
Are you
I just
proposing
think-
we keep the syntax?
I
Like,
mean,
what
you
would this look like?
you-
Like, how would you define the
could,
constraints?
but you don't have to. Like the easiest thing keeping this syntax would be I define my account struct, but when I'm writing my handler, I get some context passed in that's just like the raw accounts, and I do like a context into my context, right? Into my like account struct.
Yeah, I think this is like what Henry is saying is like you can kind of do this today, taking all his remaining accounts, because then you just get bytes and you deal with that like for anything that additional, you just get bytes and you just deal with it like any other Solana native program, Pinocchio, etc.
Yes, sorry, I might be misunderstanding the use case here. What would the use case be? Like, I guess when would you not want to just transform it into the anchor struct?
You would not want to transform it into the anchor struct when you know that anchor is doing a bunch of suboptimal checks that you don't necessarily need to do. Like when you're writing a contract, there's usually like two endpoints that are on the critical path. And then there's a whole bunch of endpoints that are like more or less admin endpoints, right? It's like, I have like a, liquidity pool and I want to update one of the parameters on the liquidity pool. Well, that happens like once a fucking week, maybe. Who cares if that's optimal? But you do really care if that has good security assumptions. Like you want that to have all of the footgun prevention.
Right. I mean, this seems pretty straightforward. We can just add a tag that says skip the anchor deserialization for this particular handler. I guess would that achieve what you're asking for?
If anchor was already basically Pinocchioed, right? This is honestly more of like an anchor v2 ask. But if anchor v2 exists more as a library, like somebody made this thing called Steal, which I thought was an interesting approach. I didn't like it because it ended up being like a mess of helper functions that was really difficult to reason about the security. But the idea is there, where
we
you
audited Steal
for some things, but you didn't have to.
Well, yeah, I think, I mean, it's hard to know what the correct way to express these constraints are, but I feel like Anchor has got it pretty close. Yeah, we audited some programs that use Steal, and I agree. It was sort of hard to figure out, or at least for bigger programs, it's like hard to figure out what actually gets constrained and what needs to get constrained. I think Anchor's syntax is quite nice for that. I guess going back to your original question, does it need to be a library, or can we just have sort of the existing Anchor framework and just allow you to skip deserialization on the critical path? Or like maybe we have some sort of, I mean, we can honestly have some sort of tag. It's like this handler is critical. We want to make sure, like for example, we can have it checked first in the match statement. So there's like a small performance optimization there. I guess I'm sort of confused what the library syntax would actually look like, since it seems hard to pull out. Yeah, I guess I'm having trouble envisioning what it would actually look like.
So like the thing is like that when you do like, for example, an account type in Anchor, right? Like account is going to be like, the first thing it will do is check that the owner belongs to the current program, right? And then it will check the discriminator of that account, and then it will like deserialize that thing and put it on the stack, right? So like in many cases, like for example, if an account is mutable and you actually like modify its data, you don't need to check the program that it belongs to, right? Because if it didn't belong to your program, you would basically get a bug, right? You get an error because you wouldn't have access to that memory, right? So like there's not really.
That's only the case if you're writing unique data, right? Like if the data you wrote changes the account data.
Yeah, that's what I said. If you modify the data in the account, right? Like as in if you're writing a value to that account.
But the value has to be different than what was already in the account, right? Like that seems sort of like a hard constraint.
not necessarily. If you're writing a value like at all, it will basically like you can't pass in an incorrect account that you write a value to without it failing, because like when you try to write it, like your program like won't have access.
I think the check happens after you exit from the VM. So I'm pretty sure. I mean, this might not be the case for when they have direct mapping, but I'm pretty sure when you write the data into the VM, like that data needs to actually be different. So like if you do like account.x equals 1, x has to be something other than 1 for the mutability check to apply.
Yeah, it's not until
well-
after direct mapping. Direct mapping fixes some of these bugs.
But I
But
think
also direct mapping, I don't know. I don't know when direct mapping will be turned on. Like that thing
Nope.
itself has a bunch of bugs.
But I think
that's-
here the main point is access to the account. So your program will not be able to access the account if it doesn't own it. That's the main point here. So I think
Well,
that's
I think Dean is saying that when you modify the account data, you get this implicit owner check because the runtime won't let you modify data on accounts that you don't own, right? And I mean, I looked at this a while back, so I could be wrong, but my understanding is the runtime will only check that the modification happened after execution. So the data actually needs to be different for there to be an ownership check to occur.
Let's assume that's even correct, right? There are like many situations where like this would hold true, and you don't want to do that ID check because that burns 12 CUs, right? And I don't know how many it would burn for Anchor, because I'm guessing it would do a lot of copies and stuff before it does these compares, right? It's not doing a direct check, right? That's one
Right.
example. Second example, passing seeds in for a PDA and then doing like, it will try to do like it will derive the PDA and it will check that it's off curve. And that's like 1,300 CUs. And then you'll go and use it in a CPI and like, it will do the same check again. So like that, you don't want that to be checked. There's tokens, right? Like you don't want, you do like token constraints in Anchor, right? But actually like, you probably don't really want to do those token constraints because like if you're doing a transfer, you just like know like this, like one of the accounts is like the correct token. You don't need to check that the other one's correct because like that won't transfer in the token program. So like there's all
But
these
that's not the
things
issue with
with
Anchor, right? Isn't that like you don't need to have the token constraints when you
If
write
you
Anchor
don't,
code?
every auditor will flag it and say your accounts are under constrained and you're writing bad code. Every auditor, yourself
Well,
included. Like,
I don't-
like, come on.
Maybe you should get better auditors, but
Oh,
I think that's not
That's fine.
like I don't think that's an issue with Anchor. Right? I mean, sorry, jokes aside, I think that's like that might be an issue with auditors, right? I mean, maybe us included can be annoying, but I don't think that's an issue with Anchor itself, right?
do you
But
understand
to your point,
my point? My point is
Yeah,
that
yeah.
like the way that people write programs is they're adding all this stuff in, and if we tell them not to, there'll be like situations where it would be bad for them. But if we tell them to do it, then like we're kind of like trying to cover all bases, right? It would be great if like Anchor would be smart enough to look at the function body and be like, is this token account being used in a transfer? You know what I mean, or something
right,
like
I
that.
guess
Like
maybe I'm trying to separate the developer education issues. Like I think this token constraint one is a developer education issue from the framework issues. So I think
Right.
the PDA one that you described seems like a pretty good framework issue.
I do think that some of these like they're kind of one in the same, or they're both framework and developer education issues, because what you have as default is what gets the most distribution and it's what most people use, right? Like knowing from DevRel, people don't read docs at all. So, and they rarely ever will read docs, especially now. They just ask ChatGPT, what am I doing? And then ChatGPT recommends something from Anchor 026 or something. So like we have to have good defaults that lead them down the right path of like not being dumb.
Right. I mean, the PDA one actually I didn't know about before. So I wonder, is there like do you have a listing? Do you have like a list somewhere on your computer that's like
Go
these are all
go
the
go
things I
watch
hate about
my
Anchor?
go watch my talk at Accelerate, and I just like speed run through a bunch of them. But my point is like with Anchor, right? We either need to like have some extremely crazy smart like way of like going through every check that the account constraints, like the account struct constraints creates, and then figuring out which ones are superfluous from like the function body or somewhere, you know what I mean? Like, and then like pruning, that would be like basically you get the current, like you write your current program and it gets rid of all of the superfluous checks and you get like optimal CUs, but you're writing the exact same syntax. Like that would be great. I don't necessarily see that happening, but like, you know, it could be feasible. I don't really want to write that macro, you know, but you know what I'm saying? Like that. I'm
Yeah,
just trying to say that
I'm
like
just
Anchor.
thinking
Mm.
if we can get close enough, right? Like, I, I would push back on, for example, that mutability check that you talk about, the mutability owner check stuff.
Let's
But
say you're even
um,
right. There's still so many cases where you know that what you're writing will modify the data that you don't like. You don't
it's like
want that
12
check.
CU.
Sorry.
I mean, I think it's this trade-off between like complexity, like the user of this framework needs to write a different data to the account for this to be secure or for the owner check to happen, right? Like that seems like a very hard constraint to pass on to the developer. I mean, I don't think developers would be
Well,
able to do that safely.
okay. Let's say you have an escrow. You make the account one time. You close it one time. Like, why would you need ever to check that it belongs to your program when you're only doing one of two things, right? Like,
Right. I think there's certain examples, but I'm just worried about leaking the Solana runtime into the framework, right? Like I think ideally developers who write Solana code don't need to memorize all these small details about how the runtime works.
I think
right.
the
So that's
point.
what I'm sort of trying to get at here is that Anchor forces you to just do every check on everything, and it's a limitation of the actual syntax of the library. And I don't see you getting around that without either some absolutely incredible macro engineering, which means we kind of get even deeper into macro hell than we are now, and it's even more opaque, or being able to safely eject and just having like very simple like derive macros, traits, and maybe one layer of proc macros on top of that.
Yeah, it's kind of the case for like, hey, we could make it better right now. It would be hell to make it better, but we could. But there, it is kind of also a case of like, hey, there, this is. It feels like this is a case for a rewrite so that you can easily eject.
I mean, maybe the way to think about this is I like the way Noah said it. There's certain paths that you care a lot about CU on, and having a way to eject would be nice, but there's also a lot of code that is not performance sensitive, right? And having the old um, clean anchor syntax would help there, right? So maybe the way we could do this is have a very clean, optimized, efficient ejection path where, let's say on the swap function, I don't want anchor at all. I want to write that myself. But for everything else, like all the admin handlers, let's just use anchor. They'll be a lot more efficient.
Yeah, and they'll rarely be ever used, right? Because they're like config.
Right. Right. Exactly. Or even like add liquidity, withdraw liquidity. Right. I mean, I haven't looked at these mainnet programs. My guess is swap is probably the main one.
It's kind of the same factor, the same way that we added zero copy. So it was always Borscht, and then people really wanted zero copy. So zero copy is added as like an ejection mechanism. So you could do the same thing
Right.
here.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. I think that's a good way to think about it.
I wouldn't
I
even
would-
call it eject because I feel like eject comes with all this, especially from people from front end development. It's like, oh, when you reject from or eject from, your create React Native app or whatever, now you've got all this extra configuration to manage. I think this is just like, should just be a feature of Anchor. I should just be able to flag a single handler as I'm just going to do this myself.
Well, I think it's
I
much
think
easier than that. It's much easier than that. You just have like, if you could do it with derived macros, which I don't think you can because there's a lot of dynamic code generation happening, but say you could, you can just like expand the derived macro. Or if you do it with a proc macro, you can expand the proc macro. And then you just implement the traits that the proc macro is implementing for that account struct. And in the traits, you'll have like a function body that it spits out, and it's like, here's all the checks that I do. Comment out the ones that you think are stupid. Like it could be something like that. And then you're not really ejecting from the entire Anchor, program. You're just blowing up your account struct into like the code that it generates out of the code that you wrote. And you're able to then manually remove these checks.
Right. I mean, I think there's a couple ways we can.
Could you just add flags into the accounts macro? Like just, a flag that's like skip owner check?
Yeah, I think you could.
Yeah, but then you have a bunch of different flags, right?
I mean,
but I also think like.
You go, bro.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I'll go quickly and then you can go. I was thinking, I think the observation I'd like to make here is that you don't need to optimize Anchor for everything. You just need to optimize it for a few particular instructions, right? And I think regardless of how you go about it, it's probably going to be pretty hard to optimize the macro for all the use cases, right? Like, I mean, at the end of the day, it's still a pretty complicated macro, and I don't think you can get better than hand rolling it. So that's why I'm sort of pushing, or I'm not a huge fan of this sort of like add a bunch of flags to skip different checks. One, I think there'll be a lot of different flags. It'll be annoying to maintain. But also, I think you still won't get the best performance. I do like the idea of, these are the critical functions on Anchor, and we want you to skip all the checks for them. And, you can either implement the Anchor derived macro yourself, as Dean is suggesting, or you can just do the checks yourself if you want, right? Like you don't even have to go to the Anchor derived function, or whatever, like the Anchor accounts trait or whatever it's called. And then for those, it's as efficient as you need.
Yeah, I think that like if you just like use the macros to kind of generate by default all the checks that you could want to do based upon your existing syntax, and then you just expand it, and then you just go in and just like comment out all the stuff that you figure out, like you deduce like I'm using this PDA in signing, so I don't want to check it here, and yada yada yada, right? But you still benefit from like saving all of this time because all that code was generated for you, and now all you're having to do is like comment things out. And when you comment it out, your auditor looks at it and goes, he commented out these like 5 things. I can like now go and reference the function body and see if that was reasonable,
Right. Yeah, and we can have some developer education around how to do that. I think that should be pretty straightforward. We did have one more thing to talk about, or we have another section to talk about, I think.
This was on a feature request, right? I guess it sounds to me, just to make sure that we have some sort of consensus here, it sounds to me that we can still do a lot with Anchor v1. It's not necessarily like full rewrite right now, but there are a lot of optimizations that we can do to where you can say, I don't want the specific thing, and we should make it very easy for you to do that rather than do a full rewrite from the ground up, everything. I do think that we still need to figure out some of these other things. I need to look at Dean, your PR, as well as KV's PR, and try to get them in so that we can save a bunch of CUs, ideally with V1. But we need to figure out how we can get there as soon as possible.
I wanted to talk briefly about the duplicate account stuff. I saw there was some people on Twitter talking about it, so this might be a good time to talk about it as well. So, do you have the issue on hand, Jacob?
I was going to grab it right now.
Did you think there was like merit to that at all?
Yeah. Actually, I was the one who was pushing for it, so I want to clarify my position. So I think the goal here is not to disallow, or maybe our goal is slightly different than what Armani originally said. I think the goal here is not to disallow any sort of duplicate account. I think it's to disallow duplicate accounts in 2 specific scenarios. One is when you have 2 duplicate accounts, both marked as mute. On the Borsch case, Anchor will serialize the first one, and then it will reserialize the second one, overriding the changes on the first one. I think there's almost no case where that is intended. So if you ever serialize into the same account twice, we want to prevent that. The other case is with zero copy state. So if you try to borrow to zero copy structs as mute, I think it will borrow or it will fail automatically when you try to borrow the second one because there's a ref count check. But we were thinking, I'm not super set on this, but I'm thinking it might make sense to disallow that case as well. So just to be clear, we don't want to disallow it for everything, just for state.
Yeah, that makes sense. If you have a look at how like the Pinocchio entry point handles for duplicate accounts, though, I think that's like pretty good. It just kind of when it's in the entry point, when it goes through, it just checks if it's duplicate, and then it just like sets a pointer there. So if you're doing zero copy, the account basically in the struct would be pointing to the same data as like the previous one, and so you wouldn't have any issues there. It's mostly an issue, like you said, in the copy scenario.
Yeah, I think Borscht is the main one where we've done a few audits. I mean, this is a stupid foot gun, right? Like you have two accounts, and then the first account's changes disappear. So we think there's almost no case where that is valid.
Was the token transfer is a token transfer an issue at all? Like I know about the data change one, but is there any other like issues with moving around lamp ports or tokens?
What do you mean token do you mean duplicate token accounts?
Yeah, duplicate token accounts, sorry.
I think that's not as big a concern, because you're not writing the state back. I guess I was thinking more of like when your program writes the state back and you overwrite previous state. I think there are cases where you want to pass in duplicate token accounts, and that's more of a legitimate use case.
It's a lot simpler. I mean, when it's just duplicate mutable accounts that are owned by the program, yeah, I think the checks become a lot easier than just checking every single account is not duplicate.
Right. Yeah.
I think the only case where this is really like stupid, right, would be like if you were to have an account, like if you could, like, let's say that you made two account types with the same discriminator and you pointed them both towards like the same account, and you kind of like tried to deserialize it as two different like bits of data.
Well, that's already UB. Like if you do that, that's already sort of out of scope of the framework, I think.
Yeah, but like I'm just saying, like if you look at like how Pinocchio's entry point does it, it already handles this, so you wouldn't actually end up with a problem there. You basically like it will use the raw pointer, and the raw pointer will point to the same place, and it will share a borrow counter across the two accounts.
Yeah, we have actually a few cases where we have this issue where you have two, maybe more accounts that get passed in that could be the same, and we solve it by doing a bunch of like exiting the account and reloading, or checking if the counts are equal inside the handler and then assigning a single variable to it. It's pretty awful, but it does need to be supported because there are cases where you don't necessarily know that these two accounts are going to be the same, but if they are, you want to handle it differently, not fail.
Yeah, I think the important part is just opt-in. Right? Like we want developers to think about this case and forcibly opt themselves into supporting duplicate accounts.
If you're like talking about zero copy by default, right? In fact, like let's say Anchor 2, like we don't have Borscht, right? Or like, you know, let's just say, I don't know if that's a fact or not, but like, and let's say we were using Pinocchio in V2, like Pinocchio already handles for this problem, right? So it sounds to me like actually what we probably want to do is just handle it more gracefully. And in the case that there would be like a duplicate mutable account that points to the same address, then I think, yeah, then that becomes like a real problem. Like, you know, if you're doing like the copy to the stack thing and override it, yeah, that's the only case where I think it's a real problem.
Is it on the zero copy stuff? Is it possible to make zero copy not such a pain in the ass for noobs? Like make it not bug you so much about getting the byte alignment perfectly, make it have support for having like vectors, things like that?
No, not really. Not really. Like if you use dynamically sized data, zero copy is like not going to be your friend. So what I would say as a caveat to that is like, if you have variable sized data and it's at the end of the account and it's like a single field, that's less painful for zero copy, because you can kind of like zero copy everything before that and then handle like the dynamic data at the end of the account. But yeah, like just those two things are just fundamentally incompatible for several reasons. Issues of like alignment in eBPF is not a problem, but the problem is that Rust-C creates this like IR that gets interpreted by LLVM, and that can create UB there. So it's more like a compiler problem when it comes to like alignment stuff than like the actual runtime itself. But yeah, like I think we can. I think like it's a mixture of dev education and improvements to the library, and sort of trying to encourage people not to write programs that don't like take this into consideration. Because like we don't benefit anything by like teaching people to write bad programs. They don't benefit by writing bad programs. So it's like, okay, why are we like making people write bad programs by like enabling this behavior and doing nothing to discourage it?
Is there a world where just in Anchor v1, but a new release of it, we introduce a new type of account that explicitly has you define a header and a dynamic data portion, right? Like you can optionally define a dynamic data portion while also having that, zero copy header?
Yeah, so that's super easy to do. If you want to do something like that, right? It's actually super easy to do. So what you would do is like you would write you'd like basically have the struct, and then you'd have like the Anchor macro would pass over it with like a proc macro, and it'd have a look at the fields, and it'd be like, oh, you tried to put dynamic data before your last static data, rearrange the fields in the struct, right? So like that would be
I
something.
think maybe it'd be better to just have like you define two structs, like one is the header and then one is a variable struct, and then the header is serialized once, and then the variable struct is serialized like n times after the
Yeah, the problem I have now is when I want to do this, what I have to do is I have to make a regular Anchor account that's zero copy, and then use the normal account deserialization, and then in my handler, I have to figure out how long the original account was, and then grab the data after that, and then shove that into a variable struct that's maybe Borsch encoded. And that's like
That should
really
be pretty
disgusting.
simple.
So I just
I think
avoid.
this should be a simple abstraction.
I mean,
Sorry,
I
Josiah,
think
I didn't interrupt you.
I think that what I would do is like I would probably like if it's me, right? I write my own zero copy, so I don't use like any of the libraries off the shelf, right? What I typically do is I have a Rust struct, and I put all of my static data first, and I try to put all of my aligned data before my unaligned data, and then I try to put all of my dynamic data at the end, right? And then I create a bunch of like getters and setters, and that to me is like a pretty reasonable way of handling it. And then when I'm like setting anything that's dynamic, I could either copy the whole thing and modify the whole thing and copy it all back from the offset of like the first piece of dynamic data, or if it's the last dynamic field, I can traverse those dynamic fields, get the last one, and just modify that. So with dynamic data, you can save CUs by like traversing to the exact field that you're trying to read from, and you can do that by knowing by knowing the offset of the first field, and then basically taking the length that you've stored there and traversing to where you need to start modifying from, and that's kind of a fairly optimal pattern for modifying dynamic data. And so yeah, but that's like when we say zero copy, right? If we're really saying bytemark, that's not something that will ever really work well with bytemark, right? You need your own serialization / deserialization solution, and it's very easy to do that for statically sized data, dynamically sized data. There's multiple sort of nuances there, but if we just did something similar to what I said with like the getter and setter functions thing, that would probably work pretty well.
Could we just like bubble wrap that?
Sorry?
Someone should make a PR.
Is it possible to bubble wrap that?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just like it's probably a fair bit of work, but it's like it's possible.
Good first issue.
Then I guess I'd say like From a,
Good issue.
from a like easy wins perspective and not needing to do a full rewrite, then like I think the product plan here would be like first get something equivalent to Pinocchio, like just fix the CPI and entry point problem. Second, make it so that I can override an endpoint and implement everything myself to make it more efficient. And then third, find some way of bubble wrapping zero copy. And once you do, change the default from being Borscht encoded to being this new zero copy that's easier to use. And then everybody can upgrade, everybody can optimize specific endpoints, whatever you want to do.
Sounds like way too much work to stick with both.
I do have a call now, so I'll hop off. But yeah, thanks for having me. Bye, everyone.
I do think that there's a question whether or not it is for so what is that like that could all be happening in V1, whether or not we actually get that to V1, and that likely will push back the timeline for V1 quite a bit, I think. Well, not the first two things, but the last things will. And then is there actually a V2 plan at this point? Because like V2 could just be that we replace some of the stuff with the entry point of Pinocchio under the hood, right? Just because it will break a bunch of things. But otherwise, I'm not sure what else we would do at this point in time if we're not doing a rewrite.
Dude, the biggest win is just fixing Solana invoke. So, like, I haven't looked recently, but last time I looked and when I did that PR, it's using the Rust CPI, and the Rust CPI just like copies all the data. Whereas if you use the C CPI API, it uses a bunch of pointers, and it's just like so much cheaper. And if you think about like what an Anchor program is primarily doing, it's CPIing the token program and a bunch of other things. And every time it CPIs, it's copying everything. And that is just like totally unnecessary and easy to fix.
Yeah. And I remember the PR. We can get through that real quick though.
Yeah, I mean, I think the question comes down to like, are we all in agreement that the Anchor syntax for declaring an accounts struct is like the most ideal way to express a program and reason about its security? I don't know if it's the perfect way, but I think it's pretty damn close.
Yeah, I wouldn't say like ideal, but I would say like I would probably describe it as least bad.
You're least bad. I'll say good enough. Good,
Yeah.
lucky
I think
first try.
A rewrite would be coming up with some new syntax to define at a bird's eye glance the security of the program and the accounts, and maybe have some really clever stuff around dynamically passing the accounts in from a client.
I think we're very lucky we got to where we are at one of the first tries.
But yeah, I'm not sure the juice might not be worth the squeeze, I guess.
The amount of work that's involved for a rewrite is very large. I know that Akron's not on the call, but Akron is very for a rewrite. But he also wants to abstract even more stuff out to make Anchor even less rusty than it is today.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be an incredibly fun project. Like, if I wasn't working on Helium, I would be rewriting Anchor right now because it's just a fun thing. But there's a lot of low-hanging fruit before that.
Yeah, we can definitely push these into V1. So I think what we'll do, just to kind of like wrap this up at some point, is that we'll try to get all these different things that we've discussed today, the low-hanging fruit, into V1. V1 likely timeline will slip, just thinking about it and knowing the work involved. But it'll happen V1. V1 will still have some of those big changes that will be kind of painful, such as the Borscht upgrade. If anybody is around for the 0.26 to 0.28, yeah, no way around it. We kind of have to get to 1.0, otherwise we're going to run into a lot of issues later on. As well as the package upgrade or side grade from a Coral to something else, but we'll get there. But otherwise, I think I'll try to wrap this up for now, since we've gone on for a little bit more than an hour at this point. We'll probably do this, I don't know, maybe monthly, as a community call, just to get people, hey, this is where we're at, this is where we're going, these are open issues that we need to discuss. But thank you everyone for coming. Feel free to give me any feedback. Everybody knows how to contact me, I think, here, or you can throw it in just the Anchor Discord. But thank you everyone. It's been great to hear y'all's feedback, and it's actually shaped where we're going with Anchor.
Thanks for doing this.
GN.